In this video I have a Samsung television, although you wouldn't know it because the badge is missing, and I think there's a reason for that. Not sure which chassis this is, P54 or P58 I think. This TV I actually used in my shop years ago, mainly because it automatically mutes. It's got quite a good, I think, quick way of tuning on it. It's got AV on it, and it also mutes the audio when there's no signal, which is handy when you're constantly plugging in VCRs over and over all day long. You don't have to keep turning the volume up and down, especially with these slow electronic ones. It's going a little rusty in the grill now, but this is actually one I got from the tip shop. And from memory, yeah, it's been delabeled because it was probably stolen or something. And that's why I kept it, because I couldn't really sell something in that condition. Back then it probably only cost $10 or something, and it saved it basically literally getting buried in those days. So I thought, well, what the hell, it exists, so I might as well use it as a test TV. So I've got AV input, RF input, nothing much else to it. I noticed there's a couple of stick-on bits of Velcro there. I think that's because I actually had one of those hang-on. I used to make an anti-glare filter for computer monitors, and it just went up and had some sort of, I think, two little brackets coming out, and you put Velcro and you just hung them on the front of the screen. Because I had a lot of fluorescent lighting and stuff, so I think I actually had one of those hanging on it at one stage. But it did quite a few years use, and I kept it. After I shut the shop, I kept part of the bench along with this and that Pioneer test amplifier I had, and all the wiring and stuff, so it could all easily be plugged in to test things on the bench. And then I didn't really use it at all for the next 15 odd years or something. Just sat here out in the garage. Basically it was just behind here on the old cupboard thing I used to have that had all the TVs and amps and stuff sitting on it and test equipment, which is now in another shed since I rebuilt this sort of bench. But this should still be in working order. I'm actually about to use it again because I'm sick of trying to use this other Celestial piece of junk in the background. That was just another $10 tip shop special. I did find a remote for it. It didn't have one originally. That's at least a proper high definition digital TV with HDMI. That was why I bought it. I needed one with HDMI. But it tends to mute the picture when you've got like a bad signal coming out of a video, because the heads are a bit dirty or the tracking's out, so it's pretty useless. Like most LCD televisions, they mute. You don't want the picture to mute. Some of these CRTs also go to blue screen. Definitely don't want one of them when you're working on VCRs. But I guess we'll have a look inside it, because I haven't seen inside this thing. I don't know what was wrong with it. I'm guessing that it would have had the usual thing with these, which was the 4 capacitors in the power supply, I think it was. We'll soon see if I've changed those, because these Samsung sets were common for not firing up. Over a few different chassis, in fact, I think, all had a similar setup. It was usually about 4 electrolytics in the power supply would fail. I think 3 of them were 100 mic or something, and maybe a 47. Something like that. And these, you've got to take this little bit out that holds the power cord. Not sure what the idea of that was. Maybe that was for AV or something as well. Swap that out, and then we can pull the back off. Being careful not to drop it on the tube. And it should have here something, P54S. So I think the P on these is for PAL, so if you're in an NTSC region, they had a different letter, maybe N or something. I can't remember what their chassis were. Until recently I'd never even thought about the fact that they had NTSC versions or had any reason to be interested in it. Yeah, the usual little Samsung tuner. I think they were quite common for people breaking them off. That was another thing I used to fix quite a lot of. Sometimes they'd even lose a socket, but you could get ones from Wagner. They were a bit shorter, I think, but you could get solder on ones to fix them, because the price of a tuner was reasonably expensive. What do we got here? Just the usual stuff. Normally the tubes were pretty good in these Samsungs, but they did occasionally fail. I think I put a bit of silicone on there because out in the cold garage it was crackling a bit. And normally these were a set you just work on them face down. P54 written there again. Not hard to work out what chassis they were, not that you really cared much unless you had to get a circuit for one. And yeah, there's our power supply, the hot side. It even says hot on it. There's a resistor missing, so maybe this had a bit more. I think that was one of those double pin 5 watters. Looks like I've probably soldered a standard round leaded type resistor in there, so this might have been blown up a bit more than usual, assuming I even did that. Yeah, it's had that resistor replaced. Yeah, there's our capacitors. I don't know if I can even get that on the camera. Let's take the tube socket off. What else is holding it as a speaker? Thermistor. I'll have to put it on its side even. But yeah, power supply down the front here. This has actually got a separate power switch somewhere. Some of them you can see the shape of it, those PREH type switches. They used to fail all the time in these. And down in here you've got 1, 2, 3, as I thought they all look like 100 microfarad caps. I can see they're Wagner TKR types, and one little one might have been a 10 micro or 47. This one possibly has had the chopper transistor replaced. Sometimes the power supply would blow up, possibly due to those caps. And yeah, unfortunately you could only really jam them back down in the hot area, but they seem to last quite a long time, unlike the Chinese TVs that the 47 mics that went in those that used to cause them to blow up would only last a year or two because it's so hot, so I used to mount them under the board. These are a bit big to fit. I think the originals were 50 volts, so I've put like 63s in there. So they were a bit hard to mount under the board. There's another cap there not looking the happiest on the secondary. I think occasionally line output transformers will go in these things. Dry joints will cause your oldest. Oh, it's a D554. I thought it was a D555, but that was probably the 20-inch and bigger ones. And things can take out. There's a few fusible resistors. These white tubular resistors, round ones. Another one down in there. If something fails, they can go. Other than that, I think generally pretty reliable. Don't think you've got much problems in the small signal section. I think occasionally some of these transistors, RGB drive transistors, either get dry joints or fail. But yeah, quite a good little set. I do get a feeling the yokes used to go on these as well. I probably should check these wedges because these were the sort of wedges that caused issues. This one's looking alright. But these Korean black wedges used to go oily in Daewoo made TVs, LGs I think as well, Samsungs, and a lot of these were rebadged as Akai, and the 1084 computer monitors. I think they were the main ones they failed in, but anything that the yokes failed in, it used to burn up the yoke because this oily goo out of these things would eat the varnish off and then into the coils, into the wire, and then the wire was uninsulated, so it would tend to short out, so you'd get shorted turns in the yoke, which basically was a shorter inductor than it normally was, and that's your horizontal windings in there. And so yeah, a lot of high current, reasonably high voltage stuff, and that would really start on cooking up. Often you'd pull the yoke off and there'd be like a big burnt ring around the edge of one of the windings. And the problem with these ones was this plastic bit with the magnets on it used to always go brittle, and the little pieces stuck to the tube. It got nice because it's sitting right on top of the heaters in the tube there, and obviously some pretty crappy plastic. So if you've got to get the yoke off and that off to either fix the yoke or replace the tube in them, which I doubt many people do now, normally you take this metal band right off and you get a screwdriver and you just have to prise each one of these little fingers off, break it right off, marking where this thing sat, which is a bit hard when all the fingers break off, but you can mark it from the back. Usually mark across all the magnets as well, because you might bump some of those. It's got a ring here that loosens, it pivots and loosens the magnets when you need to adjust them. So if you accidentally bump that, you'll knock them all over the place. But you can get that off, and sometimes you just got to silicon or glue it back on. Just with a little, only one blob or something's enough to hold it. You don't really need to glue it down hard. Well, these are DIE 1492 yoke. and there was another, was it the Daewoo or something, the thin neck ones, might have been the Samsung. I think the next model list may have gone down to must be the P58 goes to a thin neck. And I think the yokes in some of those, not sure if it was Samsung's, there was a common TV for them failing as well. Some of the NEC Daewoo ones probably. And possibly even the Sonics, which were a pretty rubbishy TV. But yeah, that's one of the fun things I remember doing with these, trying to get those magnet assemblies off. And sometimes I think you even just grab the whole thing and twist it, and you could break all the fingers off, push it out of the way a bit, and they are like really jammed on there. You almost risk breaking the tube. You've got to get a little flat blade screwdriver and chisel them off. So they were always fun, but I did swap quite a few tubes in these, I think, over the years, or yokes, because I used to buy a lot of these second hand, either Samsung or Akai branded ones, and yeah, often the tubes were getting a bit down in them, or the yoke had fried, and that's why they got written off in the first place, and I'd end up with it. And you know, I don't mind a challenge, so I used to have a fair few spare yokes, I think, for them. And picture tubes, you could dime a dozen. Often you get it out of an older Japanese set like a Sanyo or Sharp or something where the tubes went forever, and actually upgrade it with one of those to a tube that would last a long time. Looks like it's dated 1987 according to the X-Ray Safe ROV. But this set's a bit later than that. I'm not sure exactly when these came out. I think these are more, would it be 1994 or somewhere? 93, 94, maybe they're even a little bit earlier than that, 92 or something. They're somewhere around that era. They had the P50 chassis, I think it was late 80s. There was even a P36 before that, was definitely the 80s, probably around 86, 87. The Princesses, I think, used them. Old wood grain, single tuner VHF type TVs. Yeah, the P50s were in the rectangle cabinets. Had quite a few Akais. I had one for years, really good little TV. $5 off the tip with someone had smashed the front out of the tube, and I put one out of a burnt AWA in there and got that going, and had that for years, that TV. It had a few buttons broken out of it too, I think, so I just used it as a shed TV for years. I think eventually I got another cabinet for it which had like a dud tube or something in that set, so I just swapped the cabinet over and sold it to someone in the end because I didn't want it anymore. But they were a great TV, the P50s. As a general rule, had a few little problems with them, but generally a pretty good TV. Then I think the P54 was the next one. I don't think there was any number in between, which is this era going into the earlier 90s. Then they went to the P58, maybe around the mid to later 90s. And they had a 68 or something, was one of the bigger screens, different chassis again. And again, often seen in Akai branded rather than Samsung. But they're quite good little TVs. These are sort of, they weren't the most reliable thing on earth, but they weren't a problem to get going. They were never any hassle, these TVs. And not like, you know, like the Philips GR1s of the same era. Every single one had a failed line output transformer in it pretty much and wasn't worth fixing. They did have an inductor that went in and was another thing, so sometimes you got some repairs, but in the end they all failed. Whereas these, you could normally get them going. Like I said, I think I replaced maybe 5 or something of these line outputs that had failed, either burnt through or shorted out or something. But very reliable. They've got a standby relay there. So I think the power supply always ran in standby mode, and it even put out the B plus of 120 volts or whatever, and obviously 5 volts to run your microprocessor over here. And when you gave the remote receiver that signal, it would fire up. I think a lot of these even might have had standby without remote. You just had a small button on the front, and that would flick this thing in, which would give you 120 volts, which ran the line output, which would then supply voltage to the vertical and everything. Oh yeah, that's another problem with these, is I think the P50 as well, there's a little pin cushion inductor there for the side pin cushion, and they would whine. The actual ferrite in them breaks, and you could wobble this top bit out, I think where did they break? Or did it break across here? I can't remember where but you can get the top half out and glue it back together wherever it broke, and then sometimes put a little bit of glue as you push it back in between the faces. But they used to be a bit of a squealer. I think more the P50 chassis was the one for it. People used to complain about a high-pitched whine, and that was that. And intermittent usually, just to make it annoying, but once you knew what part it was, again, rather than buying a new part and messing around, you just glue the old one with a bit of Araldite and away it went again. Fixed quite a few of those. Can't remember if the vertical really failed in these. Do they have a TDA output? I can't remember what chip they use. It's possibly a TDA 3653 or something, which I think used to fail more in the Philips than it did in anything else. Got a little EE prom there. Sometimes they would fail in these sort of sets and they'd just sit there and standby, wouldn't do a thing. And if you unsoldered the chip, you'd at least get it to fire up, even if it was just snowy with no channels or anything. And you couldn't change them or something, so that was another issue. Not sure about this chassis. But yeah, not a bad little TV. I think the tube in this one's pretty good. And yeah, the P58, another very reliable television. Other than a few little things, but they sold these in massive numbers, like I say, because they were Akai branded, Samsung branded. Earlier on there was Princess versions. There was even, I think, a Commodore 64 monitor that was a P50 chassis, the rectangular one. I think it was actually a Toshiba. Did a P50 chassis. And probably some other, there was a Frontronic or something. There was a wood grain P50 in the rectangular box, which was a bit more fancy than most of them. It was push button and possibly a remote as well, but it was not the greatest built thing. For some reason they had a bit of issue, I remember them. Possibly it was that, I think they had the other remote control board with those M something ICs that used to fail in them. And take out the push button tuning and remote, I think, or something like that. So I think that they were a bit less reliable. Yeah, Frontronic, God, I haven't seen one of those since mid-90s or something. Can't remember what other brands, but I think this later era was only just Akai and Samsung they came out under. I think TIAC were mostly LGs at that stage. There may have been a TIAC Samsung chassis. It's hard to remember all the different ones they put out. And that just slots back in. I'll plug our speaker back in, because they always disappear, those speaker connectors. And it was very easy to leave that unplugged and send it back to the customer, and they'd bring it straight back with no sound. So you always had to double check that. And even for your own sake of not having to pull it to bits again. Oh well, let's fire the thing up. And yeah, missing the door, which was quite common for braking. I think the pins on there usually survive, but I had a couple of split plastic bits that clipped onto the pins, spread apart to clip on there. You can hear the degaussing go, you can hear a slight, I think it kind of fires up the horizontal for a second. And we press our button there, it's still arcing a little bit by the sound of it, so maybe this one's a bit dirty, or maybe it got a little carbon track. Some of these you turn them on by pressing the up or down button. I get a feeling they had a Philips chip in them. Oh, this is a Mitsubishi. Okay, this one's got a Mitsubishi chip. Some of these Samsungs had a Philips chip, and Philips like to have the standby as the channel up button, which makes sense. I mean, why put an extra button in, I guess, but it fools a lot of people. They come into standby, but then don't turn on. Yeah, it's a little bit of archy sound from the EHT there. I can smell a bit of ozone. But yeah, nice tube in it. And this may well still have the channels tuned in. Who knows? I would have had all the main channels. Oh, that's the auto search. I think that was what was one of the good features of this TV. Actually, I think that's because we haven't got our modulation. Something just, is that modulation upsetting the picture? So maybe that's got a little issue in there somewhere, or maybe that's the pattern generator. Since it's only an eBay special, I haven't used it a lot. Well, look at that for saturation. I can hear the EHT responding a bit as the beam current changes. It's the vertical hold, obviously. It's a little bit soft on that one, possibly because we've got the colour way too high. Tends to flare out a bit, or we're not tuned in perfectly. But yeah, it is RF, so it's never the greatest anyway. That pot's a little dicky. But yeah, it should be a slightly better picture than that. Definitely got some scan lines showing on it. Looks like that thing comes out on channel 4, although we've lost it now. There it is. Yeah, there's our master power switch. So that's another thing that can get pressed since it was under a cover and people didn't realise it was there. Yeah, it's gone back into standby. You can hear the relay go click. So if that clicks and the TV doesn't start, you've probably got a horizontal issue. And that button's not the best, but that gets us into AV mode. But yeah, quite a good little television. Not a high-end one by any means. Clear black, so it's probably got a darker, yeah, it does have a darker phosphor in it. But it's good to see it still works, because I'm actually going to put this thing back into service. I may have to run a little bit of silicone around that cap. Maybe we'll have a quick look at that. So obviously this is going to be charged up a bit. I always just used to use the old clip lead. Always go to this band which usually has a spring on it, the wire, because that's the aquadag, this part of the coating on the back of the tube. You don't want to discharge it to anything else because you risk semiconductor damage, even though that comes back to this earth wire here. And making sure your clip lead's well attached, you don't want it suddenly popping off at the last moment. And it didn't even go pop, so it must be pretty leaky. And that's all you got to do. Sometimes you'll get a bit of tracking if it's been leaking a bit. You'll get a bit of carbon tracking there. And I think I've seen these caps where they've actually got like a black track down the back of it. And these tubes will charge up a little bit. Sometimes it pays to give it another flick so you don't get a little bit of tingling off it, or maybe a little boot off it. But the first step is always clean all that dust and cigarette tar and God knows what it is. Because these things, the heat used to suck the air through the TV and circulate it through, and then you had static electricity which used to be attractive to small particles, so that's why they get so dirty inside. Between the convection of the heat sucking the general air of the room through the TV and the static electricity, which then helps it deposit in there. So they do tend to get a lot of cigarette smoke, wood heater smoke, fine dust, and sometimes not so fine dust. But that's the old white elastic stuff that was non-corrosive, basically, non-acid cure or whatever that you used to use for these things. Look at that, how come there's none on the tube? I'm almost wondering, did I change the line output in this? Because that looks like it's coming out of another TV, to be honest. You never know, it might have had a line output swap in it. Because otherwise it should be on the tube there. Because that is not anywhere on the tube, because normally you put a band of it around, maybe that's actually lifting that thing up a bit. If you put too much of this on here, you'll never get the thing off again, or not in any easy way. Which is just, you know, makes the next guy who has to fix it cranky. Probably not going to happen in this day and age so much, but I just put a small rim of it around there. And you can get your fingers in there and just get a bit of rubbish off the dried up stuff. And yeah, because this doesn't touch the metal anyway, so it doesn't really matter about being non-acid cure or anything here. And now the fun bit is getting it back on, because you've got to put your fingers under there potentially. Usually if you press one side down, hook the first bit under, push across, yeah, and just make sure it doesn't lift up on one side. Get it in position, then we just push down around the rim until a little bit squeezes out, and you can even smooth that off if you want to. And that should seal that up. You really shouldn't turn it on straight away, let the stuff set. This is actually this new speed stuff they got, 1 hour rain ready, so I wish they had that back in the day. Usually you just leave it overnight, because all of them took around 24 hours to really cure. So it's best not to risk, otherwise you might punch a hole back through it with a voltage if it's feeling excited about arcing again. But I'm glad that's actually sealed up now, because I've had a feeling it was still a bit crackly. And then we've got the fun bit. Now, how did I get these? I think you actually fit this cord back in. Get the little bit hooked in there. And then put this in. That's the screw hole that way. Get that in place before you try and put the back on. Some of these accolades were a pain. I think, was it the later model than this, the P58 chassis? They didn't have a chassis, it was just a circuit board, no sort of plastic surround around it. So you had to get it exactly in the slots to slide up the slots. And they're a little bit fiddly to get on sometimes because the board tended to bend and be a bit of a pain to get in the slots at times. But you'd often find out, yeah, the tuner wouldn't line up because you hadn't got it quite right. But this chassis generally just slots in pretty easily. There are a couple of slots there, but just for the back bit of the plastic frame on the circuit board. But yeah, later TVs, they abandoned that altogether. It's why the Philips GR1, if it got dropped, it also had a great big hole in the middle where they cut the neck board out of, and if it got dropped it would snap right across the circuit board either side of that hole, so you'd basically get the whole chassis snapped in half and then have a million circuit board tracks to try and repair in them. I did only see it that bad on a couple of occasions, but they were a very flimsy design. But it was all about saving materials, and most of the time it didn't matter if you didn't drop it. You didn't have to worry about it. But I'll let that silicon set, and we'll try it when that's done. But anyway, thanks for watching.